Welcome to New Perspectives series organized by Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center at Fountain Inn, USA, in collaboration with Auro University, Surat, India, and Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. I am Vladimir Yatsenko, the Director of Research, joined by my colleague, the Executive Director of Lagras Center, Anuradha, and the Chancellor of our university, H.P. Rama. We are very happy to have with us today Dr. Anuradha Choudry, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Center of Excellence for Indian Knowledge Systems, and a member of Reiki Center of Excellence for the Science of Happiness at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. She is a multilingual Sanskritist working in the areas of Indian psychology and philosophy, and is a resource person for national and international organizations. By the way, she traveled all over the world. She was on all the continents representing Indian yoga, psychology, and Sanskrit language. She is a recipient of the Excellent Teacher, Young Teachers Award at IIT Kharagpur in 2019. She has co-edited and co-authored Perspectives on Indian Psychology and Happiness, Indic Perspectives, with Vinaya Chandra, the director of Indica Yoga. Recently, in June 2020, she organized the first ever 41 days long global festival of yoga, celebrating wellness with Indica Yoga, which hosted around 124 yoga teachers, practitioners, and researchers worldwide, reaching out to over 50 countries. Dr. Anuradha Choudry was recently appointed as a coordinator in Indian Knowledge Systems Division, Ministry of Education, Government of India. So today's topic is dedicated to the role of Sanskrit in the future of human civilization. Sri Aurobindo and the mother both refer to Sanskrit as the language that represents the soul of India. One of the characteristic features of India's soul, as revealed in the Vedas, is her deep quest for fundamental truths. The Sanskrit language, literally meaning perfectly done, perfected, seems to capture the truth quality and manifests it at every level of its expression. This presentation will seek to present Sanskrit as a yoga in itself and talk of its role for the future of humanity. So without further ado, I invite Anuradha to address the audience. Please, Anuradha. Yeah, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
So namaste and thank you very much, Vladimir, and also Radhiji and also Ramaji for inviting me to share a few thoughts, a few insights on my long journey with Sanskrit, and a journey which has been a very memorable one because it has shown me certain secret vicissitudes of this wonderful language which keep the passion burning because with every word you discover a new dimension of this language, you discover another insight of human life, of human existence, of cosmic existence. So as I go down, as I share with you some thoughts on this, I hope to be able to literally enthuse you to want to look a little deeper yourselves at what this language really has to offer us. And especially as we prepare ourselves towards a new future, another level of humanity, another step, another important step that humanity is being called upon to take, and the role of language in that journey ahead from one peak to another, as the Vedas says. So I'd like to also start uh, my session with a small invocation, and then I'll take it on. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Om Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matrurupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shanti Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha Om Namo Namaha Shri Mirambikayai Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Aravindaya Om Namo Namaha Shri Mirambikayai Shri Aravinda Sharanam Mama Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So I have had the opportunity of talking about Sanskrit on various platforms and also trying to present Sanskrit as a yoga. But what I thought of doing today is really to try and look at the role that language plays in enabling, as an enabler of the human transformation itself, to help change to help change human consciousness itself if possible, and the role that Sanskrit plays, and also the role that language in general can offer us. And so I would like to present this in the manner that in the course of evolution, one of the things that seems to have happened with involution and evolution, the way I understand it, and with my background with from Sri philosophical studies, as well as from Sanskrit and the Vedas, as Sri Aurobindo presents them. So one of the understanding that I got in the process is that in the course of evolution, there was a self forgetting of this absolute light and knowledge. And this light and knowledge chose to hide its own supreme qualities and manifest in a form of darkness for the joy of hide and seek, where it chooses to manifest itself once again through a process of evolution and self discovery. So, this entire game that is taking place of hide and seek is a movement of truth in its fullness that loses itself in a voluntary darkness in order to grow once again back to its own full manifestation of truth. So that can be one way of conceiving this movement of involution to evolution. And in this movement, one can also look at this movement that is happening in the form of light. So there is light, an absolute, omnipresent, omniscient light that chooses to cover itself, to veil itself, and acquire the form of an apparent darkness, which enshrines light deep in its womb, and which in the Vedas is the lost sun, that sun of truth that is hidden in the depths of the caves of our being, of manifestation, of matter, of the body. So there is this light which is enshrined, embedded deep within that being, which again then manifests itself gradually in the course of evolution, and which seeks to manifest itself and shine forth and radiate its omnipresence back into the universe, back into creation. So one can look at this movement as a movement of light also. So there's a movement of truth which is hiding itself and that is manifesting itself again. There is a movement of light that is hiding itself and then manifesting itself again. And then in terms of in terms of the longevity, if I can say, there is this immortality of consciousness that allows to wear the mantle of death in order to again uncover itself and rediscover its immortality. But with a difference, this rediscovering of immortality is not by the shedding off of the mantle, but of enlightening, of divinizing the mantle itself and achieving a kind of a transformation. So these three movements have been very beautifully captured in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad mantra, which is Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. So we have Asat, so Sat, that truth, that being which forgot itself became Asat, and then which has to become Sat again. So one has to be led through that. How led? It's not. We will not be able to get to that through our own intelligence. One has to surrender the intelligence of one's present mental capacities and allow to be carried, allow oneself to be transported into that other dimension, which is our deeper self, our deeper nature. The second movement is from Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. So the story is really starting from below, where we are already in that darkness and we are seeking to find the light. And then Mrityur. So this darkness is also reflected in terms of death. So from death, let's go to immortality. But the understanding of Sanskrit grammar can bring in a very beautiful aspect of this particular verse where it says, take me to the light, or take me to the truth of the falsehood. So you can either say asataha can either mean from falsehood or it can also mean of falsehood. So you get take me to the truth of the falsehood, take me to the light of the darkness, take me to the immortality of death. So when we talk of going to the immortality of death, we see that just the slight shift in grammar can offer us a very different ontology to work upon. In one, you have two apparently different realities, and you're trying to go from one to the other. In the other one, just with a nudge almost of the grammatical formulation, you suddenly have the possibility of understanding that there is no absolute negative that is apparent. There is only an apparent negativity that we have to pierce beyond and touch the deeper truth underlying it. So a mantra here that allows us to understand two different realities by a small grammatical change. But why did I refer to a mantra? Because the way I understand it, there is also another movement that is taking place in this whole play of consciousness playing hide and seek with itself. And that, according to me, is the understanding of sounds itself. So if everything is indeed vibration, initially that vibration has a clarity. There is a clarity, there is a brilliance, there is a openness about it. There is a direct access to the vibrational quality of truth structures through sound. As involution takes place, there seems to be, I mean, we can even look at that initial vibration that is multiplying itself into various manifolds of creations. And as it becomes the many, that it becomes, in terms of sounds, it becomes also more noisy in its structures as sound interfaces with each other. And these sound structures also form the very nature of our being. So, if we look at ourselves as sound structures, we see that at the physical level, there is a densification, there's a formation of a sound structure. At the emotional level, we are formed of our emotions are also vibratory in nature and they form a certain vibratory structure of our being. At the mental level, also, there are vibratory structures. And then, of course, there are layers beyond it. So we can conceive of the human entity as being a manifestation of different dimensions of sound structures. If we are this different manifestation of sound structures, what also seems to format us further are our thoughts, our emotions. These thoughts and emotions often articulate themselves in the form of language. So the language one is using is very interestingly also then formatting our structures almost at the level of our physiology as well. Because they say that when we think, our thoughts are, they say that if you keep thinking of something at least 4 times, so there is a repeated thinking, then it helps to form a more reinforced neural pathway in the brain, which then starts becoming. So, thought gets transformed into material reality when we keep thinking on those lines a few times. So, thoughts in themselves are creative of, let's say, our material existence. But thoughts are expressing themselves in the form of language. Different languages format our thinking differently. And why do I say that? There are certain languages that have different sound structures. So if we try and understand language itself, language has sound structures, language has word formations, language has grammatical structures, and then language has content that then is the more evolved representation of the thought of a culture, the thought of a civilization. So the first part of it is when language is manifesting itself in terms of sounds. Different languages have different sound combinations. Now, the Sanskrit language is very special because um, the very source, the origin of the Sanskrit language can be traced to the Vedas. And the Vedas themselves are not supposed to have originated in the human mind. What does that really mean? So I'll share with you my simplified, if I may say, understanding of this phenomenon. So the Vedas were received by the rishis at the height of their aspirations to understand certain fundamental questions of existence, like who am I, what is the purpose of my existence, where am I going, what is my relationship with the world around me. In order to find answers to these questions, the Vedic rishis realized very early on that these answers are not really out there, in the sense that they cannot do certain procedures to arrive at those answers. But these answers lie fundamentally in the way we are looking at the world initially. So they identified very early on that our understanding of reality in general is very flawed, because it is mediated through mind structures, and mind structures are dependent on the past experiences that they have had. So there is a certain limitation in the access to the transparency of the world that we see. There is a mediation that happens. So there was a certain realization that, if is it possible to have an access to reality which is unmediated through the mind, which is a limited instrument of knowledge in itself, and it can acquire greater capacities, but as it normally is utilized, it seems to have certain limitations. So the Vedic rishis quietened their minds, they quietened their emotions, they arrived at a certain stillness of the being. And when they achieved the stillness of the being, they basically allowed themselves to listen to the answers from the universe. So the universe in itself is functioning with an incredible harmony. There is an incredible harmony and a law that governs the functioning of the universe. When the Vedic rishis quieten their minds with these open questions about fundamental uh, questions regarding their own existence, they allowed their listening to be impacted by the answers they received from the universe. And when these answers were, were heard by them in the form of mantras, there was, because of the silence of their being, no distortion that was taking place of their medium. And they expressed it in the form of the Sanskrit mantras, the Vedic hymns. So when these sounds express themselves through the in the form of the Vedic hymns, they found their natural expressions through the human vocal system, and almost mapped the harmony of the universe or the harmony of creation in the formation of sounds of the human vocal system. So the human vocal system captured the laws of the creation in a spontaneous order that retained this harmonious music of the skies, in a sense, the music and the rhythm of the universe. All right. And as a result, when you see the arrangement of the Sanskrit alphabet, the arrangement of the Sanskrit letters is a very scientific presentation of the order in which sound emerges from the human vocal system. So you have the vowels. First of all, first and foremost, the human vocal system is arranged very, very systematically. The entire range from the throat to the mouth, which is the range that can produce these sounds of the universe. It's the only region in the human body that can produce these sounds. And I think there's some study also that remains to be done to see whether the origination or the place of touch of these sounds correspond to the throat, then it corresponds to the palate, then it corresponds to the cerebral, corresponds to the teeth, and then the lips. So there is a kind of a ratio of dividing this human vocal system that I think has is more than just coincidental, but I guess that is something that needs to be studied still. But what we find in the Sanskrit alphabet or the Sanskrit Varnamala is that each of the letters of the Sanskrit Varnamala corresponds to these different places of pronunciation, and not randomly again. There is a very definite order in which these sounds are produced. So you have the A, the very first sound, then you have the E, the palatal, the vowels that you have. So you have the A, the E, and then the U. So there's a division almost of the human vocal system there. And then you have the short and the long vowels, which somehow seems to capture the phenomenon of time in sound. You can have short time, you can have long time, and you can have very long time in speech. All right. So the length of the vowel seems to have captured the concept of time. So the place captures the space. The length of vowel seems to capture the concept of time in sound. And then the third very, very important element is the element of breath. When we talk of existence, we breathe, we are, we don't breathe, we are not. So, breath is as fundamental as that to who we are in this manifested world. And yet, not many languages recognize the significance of this breath or don't incorporate it into the very sound structures of the language itself. In Sanskrit, when we talk, I mean, I'll talk about the vowels first, I'll complete that series and then go into the consonants. So you have the the short and the long. Then you have the the palatal sounds, and then you have the the labials. Those are the simple sounds. And then you have the more complicated, the cerebral sounds, which are the and then you have the dental, which is seldom used but yet included to keep the perfection of the sound system. So you have the and then you have the combined sounds. So you have stimulated each of these regions independently, and then you have the combinations. And these combinations also they have certain effects that they create. So when you go from A to U, so I like to show it on my fingers. So you have the E, U, R, 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 R. Now you go from the A to the E. So if you do I, you get a sound in the middle, which is the A. And that's the sound that is in the next sound. And then you have the slow motion, I. And then you have the ah to the oo. So you go, ow. And therefore you have the sound in the middle, the midpoint, and then you have the ow, the slow motion. And then you have two other sounds which are quite unique to the Sanskrit language almost. You have the and then the ah. And Vladimir also the other day was talking about the fact that this seems to be quite a unique feature of the Sanskrit language. And we see that this incorporation of the which is like the closing of all the sounds, it does something to the being. And then you do the it has a phenomenon of a release. So just in the vowels, we have captured time, space, breath, and the whole the entire encapsulation of it with the also. So there's an establishment of all these sounds just with the recitation of the vowels of this language. Moving on to the consonants, you have the k, k. So you have the sound in the throat, and then you have the aspirated the k, and then you have the g, the voice, and then the unwords, the g. So you have the breath that is going out there, and then the nasal, the that happens. Now, what are we doing here with the breath? We are using our breath, or we are assigning a breath to a quantum of breath, a very definite quantum of breath to the utterance of every single letter, associated with every single space, connected to every single duration. So you can have ka ka and or ka ka. The breath and the sound and the time, all of that are taken into consideration. Moving on, you have the cha, cha, ja, jha, nya, ta, tha, da, dha, na in the cerebrals, ta, tha, da, dha, na in the dental, pa, pa, ba, bha, ma in the breath in the labials. I'm sorry, ta, tha, da, dha, na the dentals, and pa, pa, ba, bha, ma in the labials. And then when you're doing the vowels, we are going from a to e. Now you do the reverse. So ya, r. So e to a is ya, r to a is ra, u to a is the l to a is la, u to a is wa. So again, the sound is going back into the system, and then you have sh, sh, sa. Again, we're doing the touch back, and then the ha. So just the recitation of the Sanskrit alphabet is a very systematic uh, play and a means of generating awareness of the human vocal system. So one cannot utter a single Sanskrit sound without placing one's attention very consciously on where are you pronouncing it from, how long are you saying it, how much of breath are you putting into it. Now, these letters that we have pronounced also correspond to different chakras. You see, the breath is involved, the breath that is connected to our Ida and Pingala, to the two major nadis, because those two nadis then crisscross. They are the two energy meridians also that crisscross in our being and go all the way down to the Muladhara. So, very interestingly, when one is doing the alphabets, so the vowels are all in the throat, and the vowels are also known as the matrikas. They are the sounds that they are the sounds that allow the consonants to express themselves. And the vishuddha, this area in terms of the chakra, corresponds to the human individuality. It corresponds to our expression. So for the letters, the vowels are their expression. For the human individual, our throat, these points of the throat are the places from which the 16 petals of the Vishuddha chakra are the sources through which our voice finds articulation through the letters and through which thoughts express themselves. So language finds its expression through the thoughts, through the letters of any language. But in the Sanskrit language, each of these letters has been very systematically organized. We then move on to the with the next 12 letters of the consonants. So from ka to tha, they're in the heart center. And then the next 10 are in the Manipura, the center, the navel center. And the next 6 are in the Swadhisthana, the center of one's, in a sense, one's identity and being and pleasure. And then you have the Mooladhara, the next 4 in the Mooladhara, the sacral chakra, the root chakra. And very interestingly, next, the last 2. So the Sanskrit letter in itself has 49 letters. 49 plus the ksham are included in what we know as the mantra purusha. The being itself is conceived as a sound structure, and this sound structure has specific sounds that can stimulate it in different manners. And when in this organization of the Varna Mala, the 40, the ones that we have gone down, the last 2 are the hum and the ksham, which are back in the Ajna chakra. So just the recitation of the Sanskrit alphabet does many, many things. All right. It is a stimulation of the vocal system very systematically. It is a, like I said, it is a capturing of space, sound, breath in one go at one go. It is the stimulation of the energy centers in the body. and then the awakening through the hum and ksham of the Ajna Chakra. Physiologically, also, they say that because there is a systematic stimulation of all the um, major parts of the mouth, in a sense, we see that it also corresponds to a certain stimulation in the brain, which in turn again stimulates the body in a particular manner. Now, if I, I was talking initially about the fact that languages uh, subscribe to certain sets of sounds. So if I take the French language, for example, so the French language doesn't have any cerebral sounds. So there is no t, th, d, d at all in that language. It only has the dentals th, th, d, th, n. And even so, I normally used to say that about the English language, but then I realized that the English language can go there. But in the French language, for example, even the R, there is no r sound really in the French language. It's a h, it's a guttural retrospect. It's somewhere out there, It's in that. Vladimir will be able to more specifically possibly say which point exactly it is in the throat. But it's more. It's a bit of above the guttural kind of a sound there, and so you see that in the French, if you only spoke French in your lives, then this area between the palatal and the dental would never be physiologically stimulated, which in turn would mean that those corresponding regions in the brain would not be physiologically stimulated. Now, when you think of it, you realize that it's not such a small thing after all. To have those points also stimulated just when you're using language, and then to have the rest of the being that is activated just with the use of language. Everything else comes secondary. But the mere pronunciation of this language, the mere articulation of this language, is a way of activating the physical being as well. And it's in this context that one can start talking of the precision of sounds, because when we spoke of the mantras, as we saw, were sounds of the universe impacting the human system and manifesting themselves with zero distortion of the system through which they were traversing. In Vedic literature, they talk of four levels of speech, where they talk of the para, the beyond, which is untainted by any form of distortion. It is this satya that I understand of the Vedas. So there are these ideals that are there. And then there is a connection with them, the individual, the rishi, who in the silence of his being allowed the sensory contact to take place with these vibrations of the cosmos. And when that contact took place, then you had the pashyanti, the seeing of the sound. So the Vedic rishis were the mantra drashtaraha and the satya shrotaraha. They were the seers of the mantra. They were the listeners of the truth. Now, when the sounds entered the human system, they then uh, they then translated themselves through the human being and found articulation in the physical form. That translation through the atmosphere of the human being. There is an inner atmosphere, there is an inner space that is determined by our thoughts, that is determined by our emotions, that is determined by our physical reality. Our inner space is conditioned by all these different factors. So in the context of the Vedic rishis' inner space, they had quietened their system so that the input vibration that was coming in had no distortion. So the para was able to manifest itself in Vaikhari with zero distortion in the middle. Okay. And therefore, it contained the same impact. The power of the cosmos was undiluted in its expression through the human vocal system. And that's why the mantra is, in a sense, one can understand the mantra as systematized sound technology, where sounds are placed in certain order in that will necessarily produce the original effect that they had, or the original seeing of the Vedic rishis. So this power of the mantra to recreate original cosmic experiences is enabled by any individual who is repeating these mantras. So the more one repeats these sounds, and also precisely, and why the precision in a sense? The precision is important because it's like a password. You see, if we visualize the whole universe like a web of vibrations, it's like the internet of sounds. And in this internet of sounds, there are dimensions to be discovered. But it's like the sites of this internet of sounds. In order to access those sites, you need the right passwords. So if one puts in the password of a small a instead of a capital A, the site will not open. So this precision of sound, there is a truth of sound, which is independent of whether I like to do it this way or I like to do it that way. Sound has its own truth, and that own truth of sound is a communicator of experience. That's something which is very important to understand about it. Okay. So when sound is a communicator of experience, it has the capacity in the reverse manner to still the sounds of the human system to recreate that original experience. So, as human species that belongs to the Kali Yuga, the inner atmosphere is as noisy as it could get, with no hope of getting any quieter because we are just being bombarded by the real Internet of Things. So we are getting bombarded by so many inputs that have nothing to do with our lives as well. And what we underestimate is that with every input that comes into the system, our being is being stimulated consciously, subconsciously, at all levels. And this stimulation of the being in terms of sounds is creating more noise. So, one effective way of silencing that noise is by associating with sounds that are powerful and conscious of, I would like to say, brihat or vast experiences. And maybe I can just do this for you as an experiment with the sound ah. So if you do the sound ah and you hear a sound ah which is like ah, the moment you hear that sound, you know that the atmosphere from which it is emerging is a painful atmosphere. It's not like a free and flowing atmosphere. And that pain could be because of a physical pain, it could be because of an emotional pain, it could be because of a mental pain. All these different varieties of pain clog the inner space and prevent the sound of our existence, the ah, to manifest itself freely. Now, if you listen to another sound, which is possibly an ah, instantly we hear that that sound is possibly emerging from a space which has a little more freedom of movement, which possibly has more alignments. It's not absolute, but possibly. I mean, just in terms of the sounds, one can compare them and understand the atmosphere through which they're coming. So when we are talking of the mantras in the Sanskrit language, especially, it is a bit like in a battlefield when you listen to a very beautiful music. The entire being will start following that beautiful music. It can be a flute, it can be a santoor, it can be any beautiful strain of music. So, in our noisy battlefield of sounds that are in the inner atmosphere, that battlefield, which is the result of this mind which is overactive, the emotions that have been overworked, the physical body itself that is overstressed with all the deadlines that we are forever trying to meet and not achieving, also, the stressors that we are, introducing into our system. A simple way that was prescribed, in fact, in the Kali Yuga, in this age of falsehood, in this age of absolute darknesses, was to take recourse to the mantra. Because if one knows how to surrender oneself to the sound of the cosmos, literally, if one wants to reproduce these sounds, and you see that the more one does these sounds, the more one utters the Sanskrit language, one thing that happens subconsciously is the regulation of breaths, because every breath is calculated. The regulation of the breath in a specific manner will regulate the emotions. The regulation of the emotions can lead to a regulation of the mind. So there was, in fact, a TED talk that I heard where that a person says, so, I mean, he confesses, he says that if you want to silence your mind, learn Sanskrit. Learn, just recite tons and tons and continuous bombardment of Sanskrit sounds. And he achieved a blank mind. I'd be very happy to share that also. So I should in fact try and see if I can find that. So the utterance of the Sanskrit sounds in a particular order is not just a systematization of breath. It is not just a circuiting of the energy systems in very specific manners, but it is also in the same way, from the point of view of sound in itself and the origins of sound, forcing the human mind to surrender itself and just do that which is right. So, where the precision of sound becomes important is because there is no scope for human preferences to intervene. The Sanskrit language is one language which doesn't say that, which doesn't allow really the scope of saying, I want to say it like that, so I will say it like that. There is zero tolerance for subjective preferences or dislikes. This is how you have to say it, and you have to say it like that. The closer we can approximate it, the more effective will be the result. It's all very if and then, very binary in its results. We underestimate again to what extent this requirement of a pursuit of rhythm in sound uh, is the pursuit of rhythm in sound, in pronunciation, in grammar. I didn't have the time to go into grammar much, but the grammar of the Sanskrit language is so precise in the way you look at the word. You cannot look at the world in Sanskrit and not understand the relationship of everything else with everything else. One cannot articulate, one cannot speak Sanskrit if those relationships are not clear, because the prepositions are embedded in the word itself. It's a much longer story, but I'll not go into that. But I think it's enough to say this much, that the Sanskrit language is a language which says that, which necessitates the human system, the human mental system, to categorize the world around it and uh, make decisions which are very comprehensive in a certain sense. It facilitates. I will not say that it is the only factor. So while I extol the magnificence of the Sanskrit language, I also talk of the limitations of any language, because a language is after all used by the human mind, and if that human mind does not have its purities, does not have its clarities, then no matter what language one speaks, one will still not have that realization of divinity or allow that light to shine forth. So the Sanskrit language can also be used in a very mechanical, very mundane manner, which will not release its power to the user. But the Sanskrit language at the same time has its own spirit, it has its own dharma. And the more one quietens the being and allows the dharma of the Sanskrit language to express itself, the more we will find, or rather, the more it um, facilitates truth structures, from its sounds to its word formations to its grammatical conceptions to its content of language, to manifest itself in one's life. So, I mean, there just is so much to say, because we've only touched upon the sounds, we can touched upon possibly very little of the grammar, the words themselves, each of the word. And I will say this word and I will stop, because I think I have to allow some time for questions. So one word that I think is very representative of the Indian culture, which has been again captured in sound, that I would like to talk about, is the Brahman. The very concept of brah, or coming the word Brahman, coming from the root brah, which means to expand. And my little dabbling with Vedic psychology, the way Sri Aurobindo presents it, has shown that the entire Vedic philosophy, the Vedic worldview, the Vedic quest can be summarized in three ways. It is about playing with between light and darkness, and expansion or contraction. Okay, it's either that, and it's between truth and untruth. So the right or the not right. So the whole goal of the Vedic quest was to find expansion, expansion in thought, expansion of spirit, expansion, because the very essence of creation is expansion. And it is this brih which allows the experience of that expansion to be captured in a word. So we have, let's say, the mantra that we say before eating, Brahmar Panam Brahmahavihi. So the offering itself, every action in its potential is a means to allow us to reconnect to that expansiveness of ourselves. So Brahmar Panam, this movement itself is Brahman. Brahmar Panam Brahma Havihi. Whatever one is offering is also Brahman. Brahma Gnau. So the fire in which one is putting all this, and that fire from a Vedic point is that original will that became creation, that will that chose to become the many, the will that chose to become the limited in order to become the unlimited again. The supreme game that is not very easy to comprehend, but which is not easy for the human mind to comprehend. But I guess if one allows the spirit to manifest, it would be an easier connection uh, to resonate with. So this game is of, so Brahma Gnau, so the fire, this will, this cosmic will of evolution. We add our actions into that ahuti, then we offer it into that Maha Yajna that is taking place, that exchange that is taking place. Brahmana Hutam, the one who is performing it is also Brahman. Brahmaiva tena gantavyam. Through this process of life, of, of existence, we are again trying to go back to that expansion. Brahma karma samadhina. This realization cannot happen with a noisy mind. So that noisy mind, and why? Because the noisy mind is working through limited structures. So if that unlimited has to find its expression, the mind has to offer itself to at the service of the unlimited. And then the Brahman can be manifested, and then we move to our expansion. So the Sanskrit language offers through various aspects of its manifestation the potential of recreating or rediscovering truth structures of the cosmos in language. And then the thoughts that can also um, expand or discover the quality of expansiveness and freedom thereby and mastery. That's so thank you very much. I think it was Om.
Thank you, Anuradha. It was wonderful journey, and thank you for your bright spirit and kind of involvement in the creation of these sounds, bringing them from the beginning of time, how the vibrations came into light, and how this light is beaming through us, and how it can be purely expressed through the Vedic mantras. It's a very dear topic to me also. So, and since we are friends for so long, we went on our journey through Sanskrit language in India and everywhere. And I can also see and hear your mind behind this, Sri Aurobindo's mind, which is never satisfied with one part of the truth, or transcendental truth as it is, but it wants to see it embodied in life. And this search for the embodiment, search for the truth in the darkness, for the light in the darkness, for the truth in untruth, because it is there hidden, it's involved, it's intrinsic, but it has to be discovered. And of course the word, well-organized word, perfected word of Sanskrit is a great help, if we know how to use it, if we want to use it. There are several questions here, and may I read to you them and you may answer them. It seems to me that Sanskrit is more a language of expressing subtle ideas, fine ideas, suggestive ideas, ideas with nuances, etc., as if it is the language for describing various aspects of consciousness. Maybe the speaker or the moderator can comment on this, please.
So I think, I think it's undoubtedly true of the Sanskrit language that it has the potential of expressing various nuances of consciousness. Because you see, just like the white light, when it goes through a prism, refracts itself into the various colors of the rainbow, and also beyond, if one can measure it, or if one can capture them. The white light of sound, the sound Om, if I may say in a sense, refracted itself through the human vocal instrument and expressed itself through the different letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. Now, because every letter, every sound corresponds to an experience. You see, a sound generates a certain space, let's say at an emotional level. It modifies space in a particular manner. This is very, if you can see it like that sounds also modify space. If you have stillness and if you have a sudden sound within that, it seems to modify space in a certain manner. So the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, the very refractive nature and the almost equally very beautifully all comprehensive refraction of sounds seem to have captured the spectrum of consciousness in the range in which they have been expressed. Just in terms of how sounds can capture space, the relationship of sound and space and experience flows from there. I mean, like, just for example, if you listen to music, some music will make you feel happy, some will make you feel sad. So, sound is modifying spaces in order to generate specific experience based on the level, on the dimension that they are impacting. So, if they hit us at an emotional level, we have certain realizations, certain experiences. They hit us at a mental level, we have certain imagery. So, Sanskrit, because of its almost like I would say the comprehensive nature of its refractive expression, seems to cover various dimensions of consciousness in their subtlety, because breath is involved and breath then plays a role, time, duration plays a role. So it offers a very rich um, nuance of and shades of sound and expression. So that is one. Having said that, I think that all languages are capable of expressing higher consciousness stuff. Otherwise, Sri Aurobindo would not have written in the English language. So, language is also a tool. And if the mind underlying that language has mastery, or rather has vision, and there is the vocabulary to express it. So there has to be vision, and there has to be into meaningful experience. Then one can possibly overcome, or rather overcome, the limitations of certain languages. But having said that, there are things like Sanskrit non-translatables, where words in every language corresponds to the worldview that they have enshrined. So the Sanskrit language, the vocabulary of the Sanskrit language is very conducive to representing consciousness, because of the underlying vision that formed the very expression of its civilization. So the words, the vocabulary of a language again is reflective of a vision that was seen. But the vision is not bound by the language, but language and its vocabulary can express more of the vision. If I have been able to put it
Thank you.
clearly
Thank you.
enough.
Yeah, so language is also being created by the consciousness which is using it. For example, Sri Aurobindo changed a lot in English language and started to use phrases, and even grammatically he modified the English language to a certain extent. It became more supple and more open to the spiritual experiences. The same as Shakespeare modified English language to a certain extent, to great extent actually, that it became an English language as we know it today, because he used his consciousness and he created language which we are now using. Now, in the same manner, if we can imagine that Vedic rishis put into language, they created the language, they brought down those ideas and put them, expressed them in the formations which are now, which can charge us now, can conceive us, can create our consciousness today. That's why Veda was so important and was kept by tradition for so long, till nowadays. So for thousands of years it was kept intact, because it was necessary to keep that consciousness, that expression of pure consciousness, for us today, not for those in the past. And that is the misconception of the Veda today, that it is only a history of some literature or religion. It's not. It's for the future. It's important for the future. And that's why Sri Aurobindo was translating it all the time. Till the last days of his life, he was dealing with Vedic verses from the Rig Veda. He makes the notes.
I also wanted to share, but so I mean, this is my personal question as well. So, the Sanskrit language does not have the verb to have.
Mm.
It only has the verb to be as an auxiliary verb. So I'm wondering, if no matter how evolved the English language gets or how evolved any other language gets, but the binary of having and being, or this division of just the concept of having and being, to what extent will it allow the unitary consciousness to manifest itself, is a question that I have. For example, the notion of being could only emerge or could become the only necessary verb in the Sanskrit language, the main verb, because if you are everything, then who can have what? The very concept of having is non-conceivable, because you are everything. One is everything. Then how is there is no question of having? So the consciousness that, or rather, the consciousness from which the Sanskrit language emerged is a unitary consciousness. It is a consciousness of oneness. It is the consciousness of Brahman in that sense.
Yeah,
And I'm wondering if other languages will be able to overcome the difference of, that havingness in their embedded in their fundamental structures. I'm wondering aloud.
right. Yeah. Well, there are certain languages like Russians or Slavic languages which also avoid this verb to be, to have, and prefer to be. Yes, there is a tendency, but of course, because it's a modern language, they already introduced this to have, and it is used, but in a very narrow sense. It's not as it is used in English. In English, to have is nearly everywhere, You have an idea, you have this, you have a feeling, you have everything. You have. So it became a very abstract notion of beingness, actually, rather than havingness. All right. There are a few more questions. It's a very, very valid point what you brought with this being. Yes, mama yutaka masti. So there is a there is a shirt of mine, and that means it belongs to me. It is with me, so to say. It is within my reach. It's part of myself, as it were. And there is also this being to be, who has both being and becoming in one root. which is also very important. So the dynamic way of being and the static way of being are, truly speaking, merged, so to say. So anything which becomes with you, part of you, is kind of
An extension of you.
intrinsic with your being. So that oneness of is in grammar, in the meaning of the words. There is another root, us, which is quite different. It is something which is true, something which is regardless. It's not a part of the becoming, it is the being, transcendental being. So this distinction on us and bhum, of course, everywhere in Sanskrit there is everywhere wisdom of some kind, psychological profound wisdom. And I remember when I started to study Sanskrit, there was the first introduction in our university was that Sanskrit has 10 times more psychological terms than any other language, Latin, Greek, and so on. They compared 10 times more psychological terms. And that means that it is totally for psychological use. So beautiful. Thank you, Anuradha, for
This was told to you where about the 10
in
times?
our university when we studied.
In Petersburg.
Yes, in St. Petersburg University. So that was the first what I heard, and I thought, wow, it's not bad that they calculated, counted, because any word in Sanskrit can be used psychologically. And that is something I learned later, that it's not because, but in the context of psychological context, you can put any word. And that is the beauty of Sanskrit. Yeah? So each root can be used in any context. You can use yoga in the context of psychology. You can use yoga in the context of mathematics, in the context of grammar, and it would mean different things, but it would have that central concept of yoking, putting two together, holding two in one. So this holding it two in one can be used in many contexts in life. So when they look with their kind of divisive mind to Sanskrit language, they saw, oh, yoga is used, that means they count as a psychological term. But every word can be used psychologically also. This is something
Because
I
every
learned.
word, because everything essentially is a movement of consciousness. Na? Essentially, everything from at all layers, at all levels, is a movement of consciousness. And therefore, conversely, consciousness is, I mean, therefore, sound also would be, what do you say, revealing of consciousness.
It's an
Because
expression of consciousness. Yeah. So it is. This is apparatus through which we express consciousness. We articulate meanings. We don't articulate only sounds. Sounds are carriers of these articulations of meanings. Yeah, there are a few more questions here, if you don't mind. Which maybe necessary sounds of other languages are absent in Sanskritam? What sounds are absent?
certain words. There are certain sounds like the r, r. We don't really hear too many of these sounds. I mean, we don't hear them at all. Like j, for example, j doesn't exist. You never hear the j. You never
Yeah.
hear the l. Like you don't have the.
Oops. Yeah, well, I will pick up and maybe continue a bit with this until Anuradha comes back. So yes, about these sounds, I can also answer. The j is a modulation for j. J and j, there are languages which are using j. I'm just picking up with j and j for you. So j, John, and Jean. In French is je, in English is je. So since Sanskrit has je, then je is actually by economy of speech is not needed. But some other like or these backed velar or the fricatives which are voiced like r, j, r, z, we don't have. Why? It's difficult to answer why we don't have voiced fricatives.
I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if, because if you look at the way the Sanskrit sounds are divided,
Mm-hmm.
they are assigned rather. Uh, the sounds like zh, for example, is a midway sound between the and j. It's
Mm-hmm.
like zh. It's not like a clear sound in itself. So Sanskrit seems to have avoided these midway sounds. It's like either this or that. I don't. At least in its expression.
Well, yeah, well, this is just yeah, an attempt to explain something which
Yeah.
is very difficult to explain why fricative, voiced fricatives are not there. But there are certain sounds which are not there, and we can consider them allophones. These are not phones, but allophones. These are
Like,
modulators. And modulations can be in every sound. By the way, people in India can speak Sanskrit in many ways. In different regions of India, people speak different sounds, They have different dialects, as it were, which became Indo-Aryan languages as we know them today. We have Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Bengali. They all became, they're nothing but dialects, Prakrits of Sanskritam. Yeah? These kind of specific articulations of sounds which became more and more national. So, and even today you meet Brahmins from the north and south and middle India, and they will speak a bit different sounds. Yeah. So these allophonic changes can go farther and farther away and become less distinct, and in that sense they become some other languages like French. Suddenly you have different situations, so the mouth is situated differently. Yeah? Or English American, you have different. So these are the kind of formations which are giving us allophones, allophonic pronunciations of the same sounds, which are sounding a bit different. It's quite interesting too.
it's very interesting because it's especially with the French language. If you try and speak French and you do that, one sees how it affects one's thinking also.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, so this thought to formation to sound expression, they have a much closer influence on each other than one actually ever thinks about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you talk a lot of French, "Ooh," and then you feel like you're
yeah,
all
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
a
yeah.
thing.
And if I,
Whereas Italiano, they're like,
uh,
oh, tutto. And the hands, you cannot speak Italian with your hands tight like that. You have to move the hands, you go.
absolutely, absolutely. Or you can go to Russian language. You immediately have a totally different articulation and the whole view. I remember when we were just one memory, which was very powerful for me when we were in the Shibiram for 21 days. You remember in Delhi? Long ago.
Yes.
And we were allowed only to speak Sanskrit, to think Sanskrit, to sleep, to eat in Sanskrit, 21 days only Sanskrit. And then when I came home, the world was totally different. I looked at the world. It was another world. My neighbors were dear neighbors. It was so pleasant to see. There was no criticism in the mind. There was only happiness and clarity and goodwill. And it is generated by the thinking of this language. I'm telling you, it's a very powerful device. It's really changing
Yeah.
our consciousness. Those who tried it, they know
My,
it.
yeah. Because my experience after that 21 day, we had a whole month actually of
Mm-hmm.
immersion. So when I tried to speak English, for example, I had, English was like coming out from the tip of the tongue,
Mm-hmm.
which which drove home the fact of how deep the connect with the physical body is of the sound, like how it really touches very deep centers of the being. So for me that was a takeaway. And also when I did my PhD, when I would think in Sanskrit, I would get different set of ideas than if I was thinking in English. So
Mm-hmm.
that was again another very interesting phenomena that happened.
Yeah. And until now, I feel that when I shift from Sanskrit to Russian to English, these are three different Vladimirs. Yeah? Right. Uh, there is also one more question. Maybe we will take this. So, how bhava gets embedded using alphabet sounds? Bhava is from bhu. We spoke about it already. That
I would also like to say possibly about the relationship of prana, a pranic being, and the emotional being. So we know that breath and emotions are very closely interconnected. I mean, there are enough experiments, modern psychological experiments that have shown that if you make a person breathe in a certain pattern, they will, or you may evoke certain emotions, their breathing pattern will change. You make people breathe on those patterns, and their emotions will be generated. So the emotions, the bhavas, are very closely connected to the pranic movement in the being. Now, as I said, with the Sanskrit language, the breath is somehow the breath has been incorporated. So Sanskrit, and this is the first time I'm going to be saying it like that, but it almost designs the breath. The Sanskrit language designs the breath nature in the human system, and that can then modulate or create a certain internal what do you say, bhava, a certain atmosphere which is conducive to certain experiences or not.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very rich from the point of view of the breath language. Yeah, there are many words which are carrying all these aspirated sounds. For example, we were joking about it. Bhubridbi. If you say one word, Bhubridbi, so Bhubrit is the king, the carrying the Bhubridbi with the kings. So it's only one word and you are already exhausted. You cannot say another word. You have to again take breath and again. So it's a very demanding articulation, demanding, and it means it's always activating the brain. It's like a constant brain massage. You have to be constantly aware and involved. It's not the language which you can easily kind of let go. Very.
Yeah, and that's why also that, and that's why when Sanskrit is studied, it has to be studied as a spoken language. It has to be studied as a language of articulate. It has to be articulated. Only then one will get the real medicinal benefit of the language, the real transformative uh, nature of the language. I think is carried in the sounds of this language.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Anuradha. It was wonderful to have you with us today, and it is such a profound topic, and it has something to offer to the whole humanity, and I'm very glad that you made this presentation. We are looking forward to meet with you again and to discuss these topics and to do research together. And now I invite Radha to make closing remarks and announcements.
Yeah, thank you, Anuradha, so much. It was quite an honor. This is the first that we've had a chance to meet, and that I've had a chance to kind of hear you speak, and so elegant, so much clarity, so brilliant. I've honestly have never had such a talk on Sanskrit touch me so deeply. So greatly honored to have you with us. And I would just say, just before a couple folks leave here, two announcements that we would like to make. But as I make these, I'm still in the presence of Anuradha and her talk and the beautiful energy. So hate to kind of shift that energy to something a bit more tactical, but we did want to make a couple announcements here. Next Saturday, which is November 6th at the same time, we will be offering our third in the series of Discovering Sri Aurobindo. And this particular one will be dedicated to musical and artistic expression of Sri Aurobindo's poetry. And we're hosting a group of singers and composers from Auroville that will be headed by Shakti Balu. So hope that you can certainly join us for that. And then November 24th, Siddhi Day, we are hosting a Siddhi Global Darshan gathering on Zoom, and we will have Sri Aurobindo centers and devotees from all over the world join us in honor and in celebration of this very important Darshan Day. And we have Dr. Jayanti Rave, Secretary of Auroville Foundation, who will speak on the topic of steps towards human unity. So all of you who are on this webinar today, you'll be receiving emails on these and other events, but we hope that you can join us next Saturday and especially November 24th, City Global Darshan Gathering. So thank you too once again, Anuradha. So much appreciated.
Very much. Yes. Could we just end with the mantra or something? Because
Please.
I think the one word that Sanskrit really resonates with is the concept of rhythm, the right. No, so there are these rightnesses embedded through and through this language. So, but could we end with maybe just the loka samasta sukhino bhavantu? Let all the worlds have excellent spaces. Sukha meaning excellent spaces. So let all the worlds have excellent spaces. So imagine this. I mean, this is an exercise. It's a little exercise come closing, where I'd just like to invite you to just visualize in yourself these excellent spaces. So I'd like you to just put your attention in your physical being and visualize what you would understand in your comprehension as being excellent, expansive spaces in the body. And then visualize that same level of excellence and expansion in the emotional being. And visualize that same excellence and expansion in the mental being and in the beings in the worlds above. So that excellence and expansiveness in your entire being. And holding that excellence and expansion and with the spirit of radiating that into the world. So become like these light beams of Brahman, really, radiating into the world. I invite you to chant the mantra of peace, of happiness, really, which is Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vladimir-ji. Thank you, Radhaji, and thank you, Ramaji. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
the audience
you.
also. Thank you for your wonderful questions and participation.
Namaste.
Namaste.